All right. Hey, guys, this is Justin Berry with the Basketball Embassy. I'm here with Coach Liam Flynn from Jerusalem Basket. We're talking a little bit of defense. Is that right, Coach?
That's right.
Yeah. So we've had a really star-studded lineup today and in the last few days, actually. But I can say from experience, I've personally taken a lot just from Coach's Twitter. We'll pass out all the ways you guys can stay in touch and stay following. Coach, I'm going to let you have it here. If you guys have questions as we're moving along, you can just chime in at the bottom there on the Q&A. If you have a message, I'll take that message, and then we can go from there. And we won't be waiting until the end. We'll be able to kind of keep it back and forth. But Coach Flynn's going to be talking defensive decision making and some of the nuances that come with that. So, Coach, you've got it.
Great, thanks. Guys, definitely want this to be a interactive session. So if you do have questions, send them through to our host and he'll interrupt me as this goes through. But I guess this session is on defense, but mainly on defensive decision making. And the way I came about this topic was that, you know, I watch a lot of film, like I'm sure everyone does, and you want to look at teams and see what their schemes are and try and pick out what they're trying to do. And to me, the best teams that I watch, it's actually quite tricky to figure out what they're doing. They're able to, they do have some rules and guidelines about what they want to do on the defensive end, but it's not black and white. There's way more grey than what we think. And there's so many opportunities at these high-level defensive teams where players can come out of the scheme, make decisions, and make great defensive plays. And I think that happens way more often than not, that there is players making those decisions on, should I help? How close can I guard the ball? Is this a pick and roll? That we may as well embrace that as coaches and teach our players about how to make great decisions on the defensive end, because we certainly want them to do that on the offensive end. But on the defensive end, generally we're a little bit more restrictive and tighter and want rules to be followed. And I think it's much more common that the players come out of these rules than just following rules. So let's teach them to make great decisions. The other driver for this was that great offensive teams, if they can see obvious coverages, then they will attack those coverages, or obvious defensive schemes, they will attack them. So a lot of them have already considered their decision prior to the action happening, because the defense, they can tell what the defense is going to do. So as a defense, we want to be tricky. We don't want to be so obvious in what we do that the offense can premeditate their decision, they can see it coming, and they can attack what we're doing. So just like on the offensive end, where we may not just come down the floor and get straight into the action that we want to run for that certain player, because that means the defense can see that coming and they can negate that action and blow it up. Well, it's the same philosophy on the defensive end. We want to make it hard for the offense to read what we're doing and hard for them to attack what we're doing. So a lot of that is about decision making and masking what we're trying to do. I think it's important in whatever we do on the defensive end that we teach the concept about what we're trying to do first and before we get to the precision. So what I mean by that is, let's say our concept for the game is that we're playing an opponent that is really struggling against pressure. We want to make that clear to our players that we want to make this team play under pressure. We want to make them have to play with the pass, with us pressuring passing lanes, so that they have this concept of pressure and disruption in their mind. And then if they have that concept clear, then a lot of our coaching's done for us. They'll guard the ball closer. They'll come out of pack line principles into more closed stance denial principles. The weak side defenders will know that there will be some players who will be in passing lanes that they may need to be ready to cover for backdoor cuts. So again, we give them the concept first, and then we can give them the precision of which passing lanes and how we want them to have their feet. I think that's really important on the defensive end, especially with defensive decision making.
Coach,
one of the most,
on
sure.
that one, just because you mentioned it, would you say that is more so? Obviously, it could be a strategy if the team that you're playing as a whole struggles with pressure. But would you say would you guys even implement that in the case of different lineups? So like with substitutions and things like that, are there guards that you'll change the strategy with the substitution, or is it typically just I guess a whole game strategy?
It's a good question. It can be that this is the theme for the game. It can be that this is the theme for this player when we play this team, and then when they get subbed out, then our strategy will change. And of course, that's going to also change with what's the level of your team? What can they take in? Can they actually change themes during a game? So I think you obviously need to have an underlying foundation of this is how we defend. This is our general strategy of whether we're containment or pressure. But we may turn up the volume on the pressure in this game, and we may turn it down in this game. We may turn it up for this guard, their lead guard, but we may turn it down for their backup guard. So I'm not saying you're going to chop and change everywhere, but I think there is variability in there, and you can teach the players variability.
Gotcha. Thank you. You got it.
So I guess the next important thing about defensive decision making is that to be able to make decisions and have lots of decisions to make, you need to be high and tight on your players. So for instance, in pick and rolls, we want our players guarding the screen to be at the point of the screen. So then they can decide whether they stay at the point, they drop off, they come out and hedge. But if they're not at the point, then they have less options. So we say a lot, if you're low, you're late. If you're low, you're going to be late to the action. And then really you have far less options. If you're late to the pick and roll, probably all you can do is play in a drop or paint switch or maybe ice. But if you're at the level of the screen, you can do all those three things. Plus you can switch up, you can hedge, you can flat show. So you need to be high and tight on all your players to, regardless of whether you're on the ball or off the ball, to make defensive decisions. I think the other point is that you can teach defensive decision making all the way down to the youth level. And you're probably doing a lot of that already without even realizing it. But you can definitely start, for me, some simple aspects of defensive decision making at under 12s, and then it can go all the way up to obviously the professional level. But it takes time, teaching, and trust. So there's going to be some messy times where, let's say with an under 14 group, you're teaching them about when to help and when to stay. And at the start of it, they're going to screw those decisions up. They're going to overhelp when they shouldn't. They're going to underhelp when they should. So in those respects, you do need to just allow the players more opportunities to make decisions. And then eventually the end product will be that your decision making will be on a much higher level than if it was just clear cut, black and white. This is what we do every single time. So I'm going to get into the clips, and I'm going to start basic, and then I'm going to build out to be way more sophisticated. Just need to enable my screen sharing there. Jason?
Yeah, Coach, I've got you. Let me see here.
Just need to flip it over to me as the host, and then I'll be able to screen share.
Yeah, give me 1 second, sorry.
Sure. So I'm going to start with, like I said, simple concepts of, we're going to start with on the ball. how we can guard on the ball and the different, options players have for their decision-making of how to guard the ball.
Coach, have you got that there yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So let's have a look at some clips. So we're going to start off with guarding the ball, as I mentioned. So in general, when I coach teams, a good rule of thumb is that we want to be an arm's distance from the ball. But if you're a small defender, so here we have Campazzo plays for Real Madrid and also the Argentinian national team. If you're a smaller, quicker player, your gap between you and the ball might be smaller because your way of disrupting is to play tighter on the ball so that it can overcome your lack of size. So we can see in this clip, it's less than an arm's distance. He's playing the ball tightly because he's small and he's fast, and that's his advantage. In this clip, however, we have a four-man versus a penetrating point guard. So again, our base gap, or the gap that we usually say is an arm's distance, but in this case here, it's probably an arm and a half's distance because the player has length. He is at a speed disadvantage, so he plays with a bigger gap. That's defensive decision making. See in this clip here, we have Giannis Antetokounmpo playing the ball here against a penetrator. He plays with a bigger gap. So just introducing the concept to your youth players of this is our gap, but if we're faster, we can play with a smaller gap. If we're bigger, we can play with a slightly bigger gap. If it's a driver, maybe it's a slightly bigger gap. But in this clip here, we're saying we're guarding a shooter, so it's a smaller gap. And we're making the player put the ball on the floor. Here's a really good example. In one clip, we have 3 different types of closeouts, the same team involved on defense. So there's a baseline drive. First one here is a short closeout against a penetrator. Short closeout. Then this closeout here, I would say is a regular closeout, arm's distance. And then the clock is winding down. So it's a long closeout that rushes at the shooter because it's going to be, it's against a catch and shoot player late in the shot clock. Then the closeout is no gap. So we had 3 types of closeouts. We had a short closeout, a regular closeout, and then basically a flyby. So again, those players are making decisions depending on who they're guarding, what is the scenario in the game, as to how close they guard the ball. There's also, this flows into off-ball positioning. So this is our defense here. We're looking at the 2 players off the ball. We have one player here high who's an elite shooter, and we have one player in the corner who's a average shooter. So you can see as the ball is driven, one player is closer to the shooter and one player is further away from their player. So although they're both in hilt positions, in pack positions, they have the opportunity to make decisions as to how close they guard their player or how far they can shrink off them. So you can see on that help here, the first drive, the off-ball defender who's guarding a shooter essentially takes one step to stunt but gets straight back to the shooter. Now the clock winds down. Those 2 players switch positions. So now, this time when there's penetration, this defender goes with full body help because he's guarding a player that's not an elite shooter. So again, defensive decision making there. Who am I guarding? How will that affect my positioning off the ball? There's also a lot of times where as a defense, you want to come out of your pack line positions and you want to deny passing lanes to disrupt the opposition. So this is Real Madrid, a pack line team, but here Campazzo comes out of his pack line position to deny the ball back to the point guard. And you can see everyone else is in traditional help positions, but whether it was a scheme by the coach or the player has made that decision, he is doing something that in his mind disrupts the offense from getting the ball to their primary pick and roll player. Same clip here. We've got off-ball defenders in pack line positions. The Milwaukee Bucks see that Atlanta need to make this guard to forward entry to start offense. So situational denial, they come out of their pack line position and they deny this passing lane, which forces the turnover. Here's another example of situational denial. There's a switch on the pick and roll. The big rolls the small into the block. So traditionally, in a pack line sense or an off-ball sense, this player here would be playing more at the elbow. But he sees that this is going to be a mismatch in the post, so he comes out of his help position, his traditional position, and he gets into a passing lane to stop that ball being thrown into the low post. So again, a player on the fly making that decision that if I stay in my regular position, then the ball can go to an advantageous position for the offense. If I come out of that position and deny, now we will have a guard attacking one of our bigs who is a good on-ball defender. And the result is a missed shot at the rim. The next position, the next concept we can have for defensive decision-making is when to help and when to stay. In this clip here, you see that the offense has clearly beaten the defense. You can see two shoulders, or the help defense can see two shoulders and a lane to the basket. So the help defense goes and there's a rotation in behind him. It's clear that if he doesn't go, that's going to be a layup. But in other times, it doesn't make sense to help. So I did a study on the EuroLeague teams who are the best at guarding catch and shoot situations. And overwhelmingly, the top three teams that are the best at guarding these situations are the best at realizing when to help and when to stay, and particularly against the corner three-point shot, which is the highest three-point shot for points per possession. So one of those teams was, I'll show you in a couple of clips time, is Red Star. But here's a clip here where we overhelp on the drive. We can see the player that's beaten is going behind the backboard, that there is a shot blocker in the vicinity. And so for this player here to help would be an overhelp. He doesn't need to go, but he does, and that opens up a three. So here's this is one of the teams that was best against catch and shoot situations. This is CSKA Moscow. You can see the drive again is behind the backboard, so it's a non-attacking drive. There is a shot blocker in the vicinity, so there is no need for this corner defender to overhelp, so they can build back to their player. I'll show that clip again. I think it's a really important concept, and a simple concept you can start with youth players. Don't overhelp on wide drives. We help on line drives or straight line drives, but we don't help on wide drives. It's the same concept in pick and rolls, that if we're playing the pick and roll or trying to play the pick and roll 2-on-2, so in this case, we have Olympiacos. They're playing the pick and roll 2-on-2 by playing a deep drop. Then there is no reason to overhelp from these weak side players. They need to see that they're trying to keep it 2-on-2 And as the ball is driven, they want to start building back to their players. But you can see that the defense overhelps and gives up that 3-point shot. Here's a similar scenario. Sorry, you got a question there, Coach?
Coach, especially when it comes to pick and roll and the deep drop like that, because I mean, as you're well aware, I mean, everything usually starts from the top. So I mean, from NBA to you guys level on down, pick and roll is a huge part of the game. Everybody knows that. But with the deep drop, those guys clearly overhelped in the last clip. How important is it, do you think, if you're going to teach it this way, how important is the concept of fake and recover and things like that?
I think you want to be shrinking. I think all players should be aware that pick and rolls are a 5-man defense. So you do need to be in your shrink positions. But then if it is a conservative or drop coverage, then they need to be aware of when is the right time to start heading back to their man. So particularly a lot of teams, when they play drop coverage, when the ball hits the paint, the defense switches or paint switches or veers. So there is no reason for off-ball defenders to overhelp in those situations. So they should be involved in the screen in shrink positions, but as soon as the ball starts moving off the pick, they got to start heading back to their players so that we don't overhelp.
And that return time, would you say for each individual player, that return time is kind of largely dependent on who they're guarding or in what area they're in, right?
Absolutely. Okay. And that's where the decision making comes, that if they are in a shrink position and they're guarding a non-shooter, maybe they can stay longer. Or if they're guarding a player who's further from the action, maybe they can stay a little longer. But you're right. You're absolutely right. It's the decision making on the part of them. And they can make better decisions if they know the concept. That our concept is we're playing 2-on-2 pick and roll. We don't want to overhelp. We want to guard it with 5. But as soon as the ball starts moving off that pick, you need to start heading back to your player.
And the last thing, Coach, before I let you continue here, with that drop defense on a pick and roll, would you say that, you know, the way the other 3 guys are starting to get back and return, does that defense put a little bit more pressure on the ball handler to be a dynamic playmaker and to make something happen themselves?
Sure. It's back to that concept of we want to make it tricky for that player. So they do have to either finish on the big at the rim, or as they drive into the paint, they need to be able to make a decision of kicking the ball out to someone. And if they can't see what the clear decision is, then that indecision is going to buy our defenders time to get back to their player and keep that ball 2-on-2. Right. So we are putting way more pressure on the offense by being tricky and making it unclear as to where the pass should go than if we all just are in pack positions, overhelping, and it's clear as they come off that, okay, I can beat the big to the rim, I can skip it to the weak side because these guys overhelp. So that decision-making really does put pressure on the ball handler.
Great, thank you.
So I'll go to this clip here of the Raptors. This is a great example of not overhelping on a pick and roll when you're trying to keep it 2-on-2. So they ice, they paint switch or veer, and then all the off-ball defenders, you can see as the ball is driven at them, they start building back to their player. I'll show that clip again. I think it's a great clip to illustrate this. So ice, paint switch, penetration, the ball handler is behind the backboard against a big at the rim. So these players start heading back to the shooters and the play is broken up. Another way we can teach or another situation for defensive decision-making is when to switch. I think it was an interesting chat I had with an NBA assistant coach who's in charge of a team's defense when I was asking them why they didn't switch a lot. And he said to me that our players might be like-sized, but they're not like-skilled when it comes to defense. So we don't automatically switch all the time. So I thought that was just an interesting concept because generally when players of certain size screen for each other, traditionally we've said, I just switch that. But I think that we can be a lot more thoughtful in when we switch, whether we want to keep players with certain matchups because we've got an elite defender guarding an elite offensive player. So we don't want to always switch when that player is involved. But for us with Jerusalem this year, our rule was we didn't switch unless there was contact. So I'll just play this clip through. You can see there's a fake screen here with no contact. So we did not switch that screen. Then there's another pick and roll where there is contact. So we did switch that one. So our rule was we switch with contact. And again, I come back to the point of if you're tight and you're high, you can make these decisions. So this one slipped. We're high and tight with our players, so we can stay. This screen here, again, we're tight, we're at the level. There's contact on this one, so we switch. Another area you can allow your players to make defensive decisions is choosing lines to go through screens, both off ball and on ball. So I'll start with an off ball example here. So we're watching Baskonia versus Barcelona, and we're watching this matchup here. We have Adam Hunger guarding Matt Janning, who's an elite shooter. So his concept for guarding Janning generally when there is off-ball screens would be to go same side of the screen as him. Generally, if you gap screens with shooters, it allows them to pop back and make threes. So his concept is generally to play tight, play same side, be there on the catch, make him drive the ball. But you can see when there's a myriad of off-ball screens that at the last second, Hunger goes through a gap here. Now he goes same side. Now he's tight. Now he goes same side of this one. So it's not just he's doing all one thing. He's tight with the player and he's reading that on this flare screen here, I've got enough help behind me that I can gap this at the last second. And if I went same side, maybe I would cause more problems than what I was solving. So he can duck through at the last second. Then he's into the body. Then he's into the body again, and he goes same side. So allowing that decision-making, as long as the defense knows the concept of who the player is, there's an opportunity there. It's the same that goes with guarding pick and rolls. So we have Bamberg versus Jerusalem. This is our guard, Tamir Blatt, who's an elite shooter off the bounce. So the concept for the defense would be, again, to play tight and to go same side of the screens mostly. But you can see as I play this clip, there he is going the same side. Now he ducks underneath. Now he comes out of his pack line again, ducks underneath. So the defensive player is making the reads of which lines I can take to get the concept done, to make sure that if he is going to shoot, it's going to be from deep and I'm going to be able to pressure that shot. Here's another example. Our concept for guarding DHOs was that, or dribble handoffs, was that we wanted to either blow them up or we were going to gap them if they were DHOs where the cutter came from the outside to the middle. We felt like if we just chased this player over the top of this DHO, that it would cause more problems than what we were trying to solve by allowing that player to get to the middle of the floor. So I've got the same offensive player and the same defensive player involved in these next two clips. So in this clip, he's able to blow up the DHO. In this clip, though, he feels like he's late, so he gaps it and he contests heavily and gets through. So again, it's the same player that we said is a shooter, and we want to make him put the ball on the floor. We don't want to give him open looks, but in one case, he's able to blow it up. In the other one, he makes the decision to zip through the gap and then contest over the top. Is there any questions for that before I get into pick and rolls? Okay, I'll move on.
Coach,
Coach, you have one?
Yeah, Coach. Would you say, and I mean, this could be at almost any level, I think, but at the level that you guys play at, is that what would you say the biggest gap between having to guard same side of screens is? So I guess from what level do you start to see that at the most? And because it's not a super common emphasis at the youth level, but as you go up, I guess it becomes almost, against shooters like that, it becomes almost a necessity. But how often how often in your league do you guys have that against the ball handler?
So in the youth level, I definitely think you should teach both concepts of this is how we want to guard screens against shooters. This is how we want to guard against players that, maybe they're drivers. Make it as simple as that. And then once they have both, and give them the reasons why. If we go underneath against a really good shooter, we're going to allow that shooter to shoot the ball. If we go the same side against a driver, we're going to allow them to do what they want to do, which is drive the ball. So we actually want to disrupt them and make them do something they don't want to do. So once we teach both those concepts to the players, then we can allow variability and allow them to read. So, I would even say at under 14 level,
Yeah.
the question comes back to, who are you guarding? Can you just gap this? Can you go same side? And sometimes it comes to where the ball is located. So if the ball is located far onto one side of the court and the shooting action's on the other side, maybe even though you're guarding a shooter, you're like, at under 14 level, they can't make that skip pass. So I can just gap it and get through. So I think that you start with the concept, then you teach the precision of how to gap or go same size, and then you allow the players to make decisions about what is best for that scenario. And if they make an incorrect decision, then you reflect on them with some open questioning, like, what was your thought process there? Oh, I thought he was a driver. Well, Johnny, we know that Billy's a great shooter, so that was the wrong decision. But at our level, in the pro level, there is definitely every game we would have a player that we wanted to go same side of screens with. Every game there would be someone, but we still had a team rule that we didn't want to allow cutters to go from the outside to the middle. And so even if they were an elite shooter, you had to top block them or you were going to gap it, but you were never going to chase them over the top and allow them to curl into the middle.
Well, that's good stuff, Coach. For a lot of our youth coaches and even high school coaches that are watching, I think stuff like that is really important to teach, because offense gets emphasized all the time when it comes to decision making and what you're doing with the ball. But I think if those defensive IQ things and defensive reads can be taught at an earlier age, now high school coaches are inheriting players that know what they're doing against certain personnel, and college coaches and pro coaches are inheriting players that know how to play those reads. That's good stuff.
Yeah. And I understand that. Like I started as an under 12 coach way back in the day. And, I know it's challenging as a youth coach and even as pros, where you want to have control and you want players to follow rules on defense. And a lot of times you skip the concept and go straight to the precision, as in you teach them how to slide their feet or which hand to put up on their closeout, instead of teaching them what you're trying to get done, which is the concept of defense. And I think if you start with the concept and you teach them the why, then they will figure out the how a lot of the times. So that's just, I guess, some theoretical stuff for coaches to consider. Yep. So let's move on to the pick and roll stuff. So our thought with pick and roll defense is that the best pick and roll defense is that the screen never happens. So our coach in Jerusalem, Oded Katash, he came up with a great verbiage for this called, we want to cancel screens. We want to stop them from even happening. So this is a big part of decision making, is that if the player guarding the ball can cancel the screen, we don't need to be in our pick and roll coverage. And what I mean by canceling the screen is if we can force the pick and roll dribbler to take a wide line, so going back to when we were talking about when to help and when not to help, we were talking about wide drives and line drives. If you can force a wide drive off the pick and roll, then that player is not actually attacking off the pick and roll. They're driving to a sideline. And in that case, it means that the pick and roll is cancelled and we don't have to be in our pick and roll coverage. So you see this clip here. The defender on the ball sees that the drive is a wide drive. So he essentially stays with the ball, and the pick and roll, the screener's defender sees it's a wide drive. So he goes straight back with his man. That they don't just automatically hedge. They don't automatically get into their pick and roll coverage because the screen has been cancelled. Same in this clip here. Screener is tight. The defender of the ball handler is tight on the ball. Screener's defender is tight. So same what we've been saying all along is if you're high and tight, you can make decisions. But as the ball comes off, it is a wide drive. It's going back and towards half court. So the screen is cancelled and the screener's defender goes back with the screen. So instead of just hedging out and putting two on the ball and putting the defense under pressure to rotate and cover, they've recognized that the screen has been cancelled and they can stay with their players. You can also cancel the screen from the screener's defender. So we're watching here, Booker for Kimke. Anytime there's a slip, you go with the screen. That cancels the screen. What we're trying to do when we slip is to put two on the ball and create an opening for the screener or the other players behind to overreact. So by going with slips, you take out that opportunity and you cancel the screen. Same with this one here. So twice in a row, the screener has slipped out and the screener's defender has gone with him. And that's canceled the pick and roll action. Here's another one. This time we're using, here's the screener's defender again, and he's going to cancel the screen with a quick show and recovery. Quick and back. He doesn't stay in the hedge. It's just a quick stunt and back to his player. So we had some, we played a game against Ike Athens in Champions League this year where they beat us in Athens, and they did a really good job of cancelling our screens by just quick show or a quick stunt and back to the screen. And by doing that, there was no separation or advantage in our pick and rolls. And that's how they were able to beat us in that game. So it's something that's clear in my mind that you can cancel screens with the on-ball defender, but also the screener's defender. You can also use the offense's bad spacing to cancel screens. So in this clip here, we have Brazil. They have basically 4 players in a really small space. And so there's 4 defenders in a really small space. So what New Zealand do in this clip is that they shift this player across to help out on the ball. We have a player in behind to be ready to stunt the stunter. And that allows the pick and roll screener, his defender, to go back to his man instead of over helping on the ball. So we're cancelling the screen by using bad spacing of the offense against them. You can see there's no advantage there by the screener. The perimeter players help on the ball. The screener's defender goes back to his player and no advantage is gained there. Some other defensive decision-making in pick and rolls is who is our player? Who is our defender of the screener? So again, if our concept is to pressure in pick and rolls, that might look different for our 7'5" man or our 6'8" really mobile 4-man. Same concept of pressure, but how they get it done might be different. So in this case here, it's the 5-man and we want to pressure. So it will look like, maybe it looks like this, where he is up to touch but then he goes back to his player. So instead of saying that everyone's got to pressure the pick and roll the same, we might say for our big, you just need to be up to touch. For our fours and who are mobile, it might be you're going to be hard hedging like this. So this player here, Emmanuel Terry, we actually had him in our team this season, an elite pick and roll defender. So whenever we were in pressure coverages, he would be in hard hedges because that was his gift. He could do that. But we had other players that didn't have that foot speed. So although our concept was pressure, they would be up to touch in a flat hedge. It also, there's defensive decision making in who is the defender on the ball. So let's say, for instance, we are switching. In this clip here, we have a small defender who is on the ball and we're switching. So when there's a small defender involved in a switch, then we want to look to triple switch or kick out the guard like this. So if you look off the ball here, you can see as the roller goes down the paint, again, small guard involved in a switch, then we look to kick him out and the big can take the big here. So that's a decision we would make if we were switching. Our concept is to switch, but if it's a small guard involved, we're going to look to triple switch. In this clip here, same concept, switching defense, but the guard is bigger and can guard the low post one-on-one. So there is a side pick and roll here. It's Kawhi Leonard and Kyle Lowry. But when they switch, they are not looking to triple switch. They're allowing the Kyle Lowry to guard the post one-on-one. So there's defensive decision-making there. Switching is our concept. Small guard, we look to kick out. Big guard, we allow him to play one-on-one against the post. It's the same in switching situations. If there's a switch and the big is someone who maybe they don't have the foot speed of our other bigs. So in this case, when we have a big who doesn't have the foot speed as the others, our team defense was to next. That is, run a player at the ball and make the ball handler pass the ball. So our concept was to switch, but we allowed defensive decision-making depending on if that was a mismatch. And again, you notice that everyone on our team is high and tight. So all the rotations are short. Short rotation, short rotation, short rotation. If you're low, you're late, and the rotations are long. Here's, again, same offensive player. Switching defense is the concept. But now we have one of our bigs who is more like a 3-4 who's mobile. So in that case, there's no next. Everyone is staying with their players and we guard it one-on-one. You can also have defensive decision-making depending on who the player in the pick and roll is. So if it's a scorer, so this angle pick and roll is for a scoring guard, then you might pressure harder, which means your weak side defenders have to be more engaged. So in this case, Panathinaikos put 2 on the ball to get the ball out of the scorer's hands. They have the bottom weak ready to tag this screener, and they're ready to X switch because they know that whenever that player is involved in the pick and roll, they're going to be pressuring hard and they need to be ready. But in this clip here, the pick and roll creator is more of a pass first player. So the weak side isn't as engaged. They don't need to be because there's not going to be pressure at the point of the screen. They're trying to turn this player into a driver. They don't want to put 2 on the ball. So it's a completely different way of guarding off the ball as the other team. You can also, depending on who the roller is, make defensive decisions. So if you're guarding a dynamic rim roller and you're in, say, a pressure coverage like this clip here, then that means your off-ball defenders have to be ready and they have to be engaged. So deep roller, pressure coverage, you need to be across ready to take out that layup. But deep roller versus containment coverage, then you can stay at home. So we have Argentina are in a drop coverage against Rudy Gobert here. So you can see the players on the weak side they don't have to be as engaged. It's a containment coverage. Everyone can stay with their players. So even though it's a rim roller, just like the last clip, then we don't need to overhelp like last time. And if the deep roller, same kind of player, deep roller, if that deep roller decides to short roll, again, everyone can just stay with their players. So it's not necessarily that every time we play against a deep roller, we have to be engaged on the weak side. It's what coverage are we in, and where are they catching the ball will determine on how much we need to be engaged off the ball. Coach, you got a question?
Coach, would you say, in these last two with the deep roller, when he rolls short, it's basically left up to the post defender to make a play on defense and to guard his man, and to he's got to be responsible for that, and everybody else is matched up.
Absolutely, that's exactly the concept. So he would, I guess, if he's in a drop coverage, they're doing that so that the screener doesn't get in behind him. So if he's in front of him and it's a short roll, just like now it's you're guarding him one-on-one.
Yeah.
And if he makes that shot, he makes that shot. Now, if we're guarding someone who's more of a short roller, so we played some teams this year where the screener was someone who wanted to get into short rolls, shoot jump shots, was an elite short roller, then the players who had to be involved on the weak side were the nail defenders and not so much the corner defender. So here's an example of that. Ice playing against more of a short roll player. So the nail comes across and he's engaged, not so much this corner player. So it's who is the roller? Are they a deep roller? Are they a short roller? Are you in pressure coverages? Are you in containment coverages? So again, that can determine what your weak side defenders do and who is engaged. Last one, and I think we probably all have these, is we guard pick and pop players. So in a pick and pop situation, we need our off-ball defenders to be, again, high and engaged. So if we're in like a drop coverage, a ice coverage here, they need to be ready to take out that pick and pop. So I'll replay that. There was a lot of elements in that. Ice, stunt here to take out the pick and pop. Now we're trying to blow up this handoff. We don't get to blow it up. The guard gets downhill. So we veer back, take out the pick and pop. But because this defender can see it's a pick and pop player, he's ready to stunt. So there's a lot of elements and defensive decision making in that. If that was a rim rolling five who caught it up here, then we wouldn't have stunted as hard. But we see who that screener is. We see that he's a pick and pop player. So we're ready to stunt at that. And we're ready to veer switch to take out that three. So there are the clips I had. And I guess, again, I wanted to just show that there's so many different decisions, and you can probably think of many more in your own teams of, the amount of defensive decisions that defenders can make, and how you can start with small, simple things like guarding the ball, your positioning off the ball, and then when to help. And then you can start moving into more complex scenarios. So off-ball screens and pick and rolls, and in the pick and rolls, who's your defender, both on the ball and off the ball? Who's the screener? Are they a deep roller? Are they a short roller? What's the coverage? If it's pressure coverages, we need to get across more. If it's containment coverages, we can play more with our players. So there are a lot of defensive decisions, and we shouldn't be scared to allow our players some freedom and some flexibility to make them. And of course, it's a little bit scary as coaches to, there will be some, some mistakes early on, but if we can get to a scenario where our defense is hard to guard and hard to read, then our defense will be so much better, in my opinion, than if it's just black and white rules that the other team can scout for. And I know when we scouted teams, we knew how they wanted to defend. And so we were already that week tweaking our offenses to attack their defensive systems. So maybe it will make your defense trickier to scout, harder to read in the moment for the offense. So I wish you best of luck with that.
Coach, we've got a question here from one of the viewers. He's asking about the on the switch or no switch decision. He said you said no contact, no switch. Is that contact between the screen and the defender, or contact between the two defenders touching before they switch?
It's between the screen and the screeners and the pick and roll creators defender. So if it was like a slip, then there was no screen, so we didn't switch. Sometimes we would force the contact, so we would push the defender of the screen would push the screen into his teammate and force the contact so that we would switch. That would generally happen with off-ball screens, not on-ball screens. But yeah, it's the contact between the screener and the pick and roll creator's defender.
And would you say, when you force contact, and even on ball screens, when you either force them to accept the screen and decision making like that, would you say that it makes it easier on your guys often because it makes it where you're kind of in control, you're a bit more in control of the pace and the read, at the speed of what happens than if you allow them to kind of dictate what they're going to do?
Yeah, great point. I guess our philosophy before the screen was coming was that we would already be on top of the player. So as the screener was running in to set that slip, we would already be on top. We would hit him, we would control him and move him around the floor as we saw fit. If it did happen where we weren't in position, then it was definitely a contact, we switch, no contact, we stay.
Yeah. Let's see, we've got a couple more here. Okay, another one of our viewers just asked, do you teach more of these concepts in like in practice? Do you work on these more 3-on-3, 4-on-4, or 5-on-5 just when you're drilling?
Yeah, I think 3-on-3 in limited space is a great way to introduce most concepts, and then you can go to a 5-on-5 setting. We did a lot of 4-on-4 this year, so that was just the way that our coach wanted to teach it. But I think that having a small group, limited space, start with the concept, allow them the freedom to use their own technique to get the concept done is a great way to do it. And then you can move to a 5-on-5 setting where you can say, okay, let's all do one way of doing things. Let's all gap the screens and let's learn how to do that. Okay, let's all play same side of the screen or the cutters. Let's all do that every time. And then the third phase would be, okay, offense, you play 3 times in a row, and we're not going to tell the defense we're not going to tell you what the defense is going to do, and let's see if you can read. So we'll say to the defense, let's gap, and then play same side, so that there's some variability in what we're doing. So that's how we would always teach decision making. We would teach one decision, then the next decision, and then we'd make it random. We'd always start 3-on-3 and then quickly progress it to 5-on-5.
Okay. Another question here is, Coach, how often do you find yourself and your players changing defensive behaviors and approaches based on whether you're leading or trailing during the game?
It's a good question. I think it's natural that you would try more stuff when you're down. I don't think that it's uncommon though when you're up to want to keep your opponent guessing. So I don't think there's anything wrong with, okay, you've played the whole quarter, you've started with pressing man to man and you're forcing turnovers. I think if you can sense that there's, you want to be tricky or you want to keep screwing with the opponent, maybe first possession of the second quarter, you come out in 2-3 zone and just screw with their heads a little bit, and then you go back to your pressing. So I think that's okay, because sometimes something that works for everything has a shelf life, and so you do need to have a plan B, you do need to have a plan C, and whether you go from all plan A until you switch to plan B, or you sprinkle in a little B during the game. So again, you might be pressing man to man the whole game, and then off free throws, you might just play a zone possession. So I think that's okay to do that as well when you're leading.
Okay, Coach, we've got just a few more here. Is there anything else you'd want to touch on or emphasize? And then after we wrap that up, I'd really like to kind of get your social media out there to everybody so they know how to find you and maybe follow up, or at least know where to come for some quality material.
Sure. I guess the only thing I'd say was that I've been fortunate to have coached all the way from under 12s to the pro level. So, it's not like we're just seeing these pro ideas and that they're not something you can do at the youth level. I think you can do this all the way down to the youth level. It definitely takes time. It will be sometimes uncomfortable for you as a coach to see a little bit of messiness and a little grey area, but hang in there. Let's make our players decision makers, not just doers. Do this, do that. Let's make them, I think a lot of times we complain about, this player isn't smart enough or he doesn't know how to play. Well, let's give them scenarios where they learn how to play the game, what the concept is, not just what to do. And I think if you do that, you're going to have happier players, you're going to have better players, higher basketball IQ players. So stick with it. If you've got any questions, by all means, drop me an email or, DM me through Twitter at Coach Liam Flynn.
Well, Coach, like I said when we met earlier, I already knew that this was going to be a quality presentation, but we really appreciate it. For those of you that are online now, this should be available later on to where you can download it or view it later. You can reach out to Coach or us on social media, and we'll have that information for you. But again, Coach Flynn, I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed having you on this evening.
No problem. Thanks, guys. All the best.